Yep. So, yeah, my name is José Araya. I'm a postdoc at the Instituto de Filosofía y Ciencias de la Complejidad. That's the Institute of Philosophy and Complexity Sciences in Chile. I don't know how to say that. And well, I'm going to be doing the more philosophical part. I'm going to be doing something like philosophy of emotion within the predictive processing framework. What I want to say today, well, how to put this? There are many ways in which emotion theories can be classified. One fruitful way in which this can be done is in three broad families. We have perceptual theories, cognitive theories, and action theories. What I want to say today is that the best way to account for emotion within the predictive processing framework is in line with action theories of emotion, not with perceptual theories of emotion. And this has an interesting philosophical consequence. Affective scientists typically identify in the affective realm different kinds of affective states. We have things like moods, emotions, drives, affective dispositions, hedonic states, and so on. So what I want to say is that the best way to account for emotion within the predictive processing framework seems to imply that there is no difference in kind between drives and emotion, that there is no difference in kind between phenomena such as guilt, joy, fear, sadness, schadenfreude, and indignation, and phenomena such as hunger, thirst, cold, things like that. So I'm going to begin by emphasizing some very conservative representational predictive processing stuff, only a couple of things which are going to be relevant for my argument. Then I'm going to introduce these three broad families of emotion theories. Then I'm going to present set perceptual theory of emotion or intercepted inference view of emotion, in which emotions are understood in direct analogy to visual perception. That's a perceptual theory of emotion that I'm going to challenge this account and suggest another way of seeing things in which emotions turn out to be not that different from phenomena such as drives. So, and this is philosophically interesting because it could give rise to an account or it could give rise to a new taxonomy of the affective space. Is interesting philosophically because someone could use these claims to hold, for example, that we should eliminate the category emotion from affective sciences and just use the category drives or homeostatic motivations, as people call it. So let's begin. So we all know this. People were talking about this all these days, but this is going to be very useful for my argument. So we have that the brain or the mind-brain is dealing with the task of minimizing prediction error. This can be done in two ways. We have a perceptual inference and active inference. In the case of perceptual inference, what we do is we try to find a hypothesis able to predict and fit incoming sensory signals. While in the case of active inference, what we do is we have an already selected hypothesis and we change the ever-evolving array of sensory stimulations so as to fit this already selected hypothesis or what this hypothesis predicts with the array of sensory stimulation that we are receiving. Certainly, there is a constant mutually constraining loop between perceptual inference and active inference. Of course, it is true that they are both doing the same kind of thing, at least at a certain level of description. Both are trying to minimize prediction error. However, there's still a distinction to be made between the two. There's a difference in terms of direction of fit, as people say. And I was thinking just now that there might be some sort of mechanistic difference. there is a difference in terms of the regime of precision weighting. As Banjagize puts this very well, in the case of action, or for action to occur, we need to transiently assign or infer very little precision weighting to current input. No? So otherwise we will be revising our hypothesis over and over again. So we need to ignore evidence for a while. No? In the case of perceptual inference, this does not tend to be the case, at least in certain non-normal cases. So there might be some sort of mechanistic difference also between perceptual and inference, and this can be accounted for in terms of the different regimes of precision assignment. So there is a difference, that's the whole point. There's a difference between perceptual and active inference, even though they do all these things together. Now, the other bit of conservative predictive processing that I need is this claim that sensory expectation managed to recapitulate the structure of the world. What I simply want to say is that, let's say, there are cats out there in the world. They tend to trigger certain kind of activity in the visual periphery. We probably begin at first with some random hypotheses, generating some random visual signals from the top down. So at first we probably have this huge prediction error, highly weighted, but over time we get to know which signals cats tend to generate in contexts like this. So we are able to predict those visual data, and let's say that we make a nice match and we perceive a cat. So that's what I want to emphasize there. So what kind of approach to the nature of emotion emerges from this view of brain functioning? Well, first I want to say something about what is the explanatory target of emotion theories. No? And the target is emotions. No? And that's my contribution to the field. No, but the point here is that commonly affective scientists talk about emotions referring to anything affective. But emotions are but one kind of many affective states. What makes something affective? Well, that's affective states or processes are those which are balanced and have this property activation, which I take to be different from intensity. I think that intensity is something else. We can have, for example, intense visual experiences. People consuming psychedelics, for example, they report that they have intense experiences of redness. Like, let's say that there is a sunset out there. I think that this has to do simply with an attentional phenomenon, that's simply amplifying the signal, that portion of the visual signal, this redness. In the case of affective states, I think that intensity has to do with the same phenomenon. It's simply amplifying a certain portion of the interoceptive signal. So we simply amplify this part of our body. And activation is something different, and that's the key for affective states. Now, so we have that emotions are but one of many different kinds of affective states. No? So what I'm talking about during this whole talk is about emotions, not about moods, drives, or other kind of affective states. And everything I'm going to say here is about emotions. What are emotions? Well, states like anger, joy, sadness, guilt, shame, and so on. So, perceptual theories of emotion claim that having an emotion amounts to perceiving your physiology changing in a certain way. Feeling theories of emotion claim that having an emotion amounts to feeling your body changing in a certain way, at least in some naturalistic versions of these views. Now, I put these two kinds of theories together because I embrace what might be called the sensory phenomenology assumption, which is going to be playing a role during my whole argument. This is I think this is the dominant view on the matter. This is a very weak claim. It simply says that there is no such thing as cognitive phenomenology. By this, I mean that that phenomenal consciousness is populated by nothing over and above bounded sensory perceptual representations. Or to put it this way, there can't be no non-sensory representational vehicles with qualitative character. Every time we are phenomenally conscious of anything, is something sensory. Even in cases when we are phenomenally conscious of our own thoughts, of our own stream of thoughts, in those cases, what is going on there is that we are engaging in inner speech, and that's auditive phenomenology. Now, for a perceptual representation to become phenomenally conscious, something needs to happen to it. No? So we have a we let's say, determine that outside there is a certain border, certain color, certain movement, and we put these things together, we form a coherent representation, but something needs to happen to it to become phenomenally conscious. So for some people say that attentional modulation, you know, that this perceptual representation needs to be modulated by attention. Other people say that this perceptual representation needs to be the target of some kind of thought and things like that. You can put there your favorite theory. So what we have is that perceptual and feeling theories go hand in hand. An emotion is a perceptual representation according to these views. And a felt emotion is also a perceptual representation, but that has been modulated by attention or anything you want. The same goes with affective stuff in general. So valence is a perceptual representation if it can be felt, given the sensory phenomenology assumption. If valence can be felt, some people say that valence cannot be felt. But if valence can be felt, well, it must be a sensory representation of some sort, given the sensory phenomenology assumption. And felt valence, well, it's this same representation, but modulated by attention or anything you want. Now, cognitive theories of emotion claim that having an emotion amounts to thinking about the situation in a certain kind of way. Having danger amounts to thinking about the situation as instantiating the property danger, not to put it very philosophically. Feeling sad is thinking about the situation you are facing as instantiating loss. There are different kind of cognitive theories. I put classical appraisal views here, also two-factor views here, because the driving force in these accounts of emotion generation is categorization, at least in two-factor views. And categorization, I take categorization to be something super cognitive. These views, and there is a distinction to be made between forming a percept and categorizing a percept that has been already been formed by a perceptual inference or any other mechanism. These views hold that categorization is key, or labeling, whatever, anything you want. And action theories claim that having an emotion amounts to having action tendencies of a certain sort, or behavioral dispositions or liabilities. So what kind of approach to the nature of emotion emerges from the predictive processing framework? Well, Seth has proposed a perceptual theory of emotion. He claims that we should understand emotions in direct analogy to the way in which visual percepts are formed. That makes the Seth view a perceptual theory. Emotions arise from intersective prediction of the causes of current interoceptive afferents. That's the main claim. So in this view, if we take seriously the direct analogy between emotion and perception, in the visual domain, what we have is that, well, there is certain things going on in the physiological landscape. These trigger our interceptors, and we need to determine what is going on there. What is going on in this physiological landscape? Is it fear? Well, if it is fear, certain signals are expected. If it is sadness, well, these other interceptive signals are expected. Well, I generate those signals from the top down, try to see if there is a nice match. Let's say that there is an important, highly weighted prediction error. So I change my hypothesis until I find the emotion hypothesis, which is able to generate from the top down the required interceptive data. And I'm going to challenge this account in the way that is typically done with perceptual theories of emotion. So what I want to ask, well, if emotion result from interoceptive predictions, where do these interoceptive expectations come from? These interoceptive expectations related to emotion. Where do interoceptive priors related to emotion come from? No? Well, from the causal regularities obtained in the inner physiological landscape. That's what I take this to be a platitude. The problem with this view is that certain strands of evidence suggest that if we take a look at the physiological landscape, we are not going to find their emotions configured there. No? In the same way that if we go to Mars, no? If I grew up and raised in the moon, for example, and I take a walk there, I'm not going to see any cats. No? So it's very unlikely that I build a model of cats that includes expectations about visual signals, simply because there are no cats on the moon. That's the thing. So what I want to say is that given the fact that there are no emotions configured in the physiological landscape, it is very hard to see in which way interoceptive priors related to emotion types, to distinct emotion types, could be built. And it's the same of claim as this one, that, well, given that there are no regularities pertaining to cloud types in the auditive domain or in the domain of detectable vibrations, it's very unlikely that cloud hypotheses encode auditive expectations, simply because there are no clouds in the auditive domain. There are no regularities pertaining to cloud types in the detectable vibrations landscape. So if this argument works in the case of cloud types, it should work also in the case of emotion. Note that appealing to distal causes won't do the job, since there are no regularities linking types of formal objects. This is things like danger in the case of fear. What in the literature in philosophy of emotion is known as real contents. And patterns of physiological changes, which in the philosophical literature are known as nominal contents. For example, people that defend perceptual theories rely in this causal regularity between danger and certain patterns of physiological changes, because the idea is that nominal contents can inform you about real contents, things like danger, because there is this causal regularity between the two. But if we don't have this causal regularity, there can be no such thing as bodily perception informing you about things like danger. Also know that this isn't the case, that it isn't the case that the visual domain is ambiguous in the same way. Think of the duck rabbit case, as there are ducks and rabbits in the visual domain from which the relevant priors can be built. So we interact with rabbits, we interact with ducks, we get to build priors about which signals to expect given this objects, the hypothesis that there are ducks outside and rabbits outside. And when we are faced with this highly ambiguous information, we already have the priors to deal with this problem. So what I want to say is, so I have time, I have 2 minutes, I think. What I want to say, well, if the perceptual analogy doesn't work and we only have perceptual inference and active inference, well, let's take a look at active inference to account for emotion. However, we have what can be called the puzzle of bodily experience. So we have, if my argument is on track, that emotion do not arise by minimizing interoceptive prediction error by a perceptual inference. I can hear someone talking. And on the other hand, common sense tells us that interoception seems to be key for accounting for emotion. So what is going on here? Well, this apparent puzzle simply suggests that even though having an emotion does not consist in perceiving interoceptive changes, having an emotion does involve some type of process that must be intertwined with interoception. So let's take a look at active inference. This is what I want to say. emotions are action strategies or policies for changing an interoceptive percept that has already been formed. So the idea is that interoception, the perception of the physiological condition of the body, what it does is informing us about how we are doing in dealing with homeostasis. Positive valence, I want to say, is perceiving that your body is moving in the direction of achieving homeostasis, of reducing this error between your expectation of homeostasis and your currently perceived bodily condition. No? That's the idea. And negative valence is simply the opposite. It's perceiving that your body is moving in the direction opposite to your physiological goals, which is compatible, I'd say, with the error reduction dynamics account. However, I really need these accounts to be talking about interoception. So I views that hold that the error rate of prediction error in visual modalities will give you valence. I think that that's not the case. In the interoceptive modality, that can be the case. Well, I have some, because Pablo and Slava have some arguments against the interoceptive view, but I think they can be met. So as we were talking yesterday, we have two types of interoceptive actions, internal and external. And external can be instrumental or epistemic. I'm talking about here about instrumental actions. No? So this is what I just said. So the idea is that, so we perceive our body. This perception is telling you you're not doing well in reducing interoceptive prediction error. So you must engage allostatic behavior. In order to engage allostatic behavior, you have to have what Seth calls knowledge of sensorimotor contingencies. This is, well, if I move in this kind of way, sensory signals should evolve in this other way. No? Or if I move in this other way, sensory signals should evolve in such and such a way. No? That's the idea. No? So what I want to say is an emotion is a strategy of this sort. It's a chunk, if you want, of certain specific knowledge of sensorimotor contingencies. No? In the case of fear, it's a chunk of knowledge of sensorimotor contingencies that allows you to deal with reducing error in the case of danger. That's what I want to say. And if you think about it, this is very similar or perhaps identical to the way in which drives work. You think about hunger, for example. Hunger amounts to a mental state that is constituted by both the negative valence, you know, that you get from an empty stomach, plus the motivation to act in the world in such a way so as to change such a bad feeling. If you are feeling this, it must be a perception of some sort, you know, given the sensory phenomenology assumption. So that's what I want to say in the case of emotion. And the difference is only trivial. The difference between drives and emotions is only a difference in the type of content, while the sensorimotor contingencies related to fear are related to danger. The sensorimotor contingencies that related to hunger, for example, are about nutritiousness. No? So we have these different relational properties, no? Like danger, nutritiousness, which are the content of the sensorimotor contingencies. But the difference is only that one is danger, and we call that fear, and the other one is nutritiousness, and we call that hunger. But a difference in content for me does not work for making a difference in different kinds in affective states. So that's what I have to say. I think I made it almost.